Welcome to the XY Advisor podcast, where it's our goal to help you become the best financial advisor possible and drive the positive evolution of financial advice. Hub24 is an ASX-listed company with over $15 billion funds under management and one of the fastest growing platforms in the market. Neither a bank nor part of a bank, Hub24 focuses entirely on connecting advisors to a broad range of investment solutions for their clients. Discover why other advisors think Hub24 are the best in the market and access the benefits of choice and efficiency for you and your clients with their market-leading managed portfolio solution. To find out more, visit hub24.com.au. G'day, Clayton here. Just spoke with a mate of mine, Brendon. We cover what it means to be an advisor for high net wealth individuals. He was recently voted 2019's IFA Holistic Advisor of the Year. So we cover a broad range of topics, how to get into this style of advice and what sort of his advice looks like on a day-to-day basis. So hopefully you enjoy. All right, g'day. How's it going? What do you know, Strike Like? Clayton here from XY Advisor. Here today with Brendon. And one of the things we don't get to speak about very often is sort of the family office style of advice on this podcast. So it's really cool for you to come in. But also, I don't even know if I've spent any time in the presence of an IFA Holistic Advisor of the Year. So I'm pretty excited, I got to admit.
Me too, Clayton. Me too. It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
A whole 3 days back in the office since a month off.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Fourth day to be perfectly correct.
To be fair.
Yes.
So I want to kind of just dive into how on earth did you get, I'd say, lucky enough to get involved with the kind of advice and the kind of clients you work with?
Sure. Oh, I'd definitely say lucky enough. Absolutely. So, what are we, 2019, I've been in the advice space for about 10 years.
Jesus.
After finishing university, I really only had two things down, and that's that I liked business and finance and I liked working with people.
Yeah.
So that was really all that I knew. And I probably realised that I'd be happy in a whole stack of business or finance related roles.
Yep.
I just knew that I didn't want to be too distant from people. I didn't want to be a small cog in a giant machine that had no meaning or relevance to anything. So that was really my only sort of guiding light when I'd finished uni, and I was very lucky to have decided to major in organisational psychology as part of my business degree. So as it turns out, that's quite a helpful thing in the role that I'm in now. But I'd like to say it was by good design, but it was very much good luck.
That's really interesting. Yeah. The way that you've described financial advice, which is essentially good with numbers and good with people, is something that I think is really good sort of descriptor at a high level. I used to be an accountant, but I preferred working with people. That's why financial advice was just such a natural progression. But for you you did a business, finance, and psychology degree.
I don't have a psychology degree.
Okay.
Full disclosure.
Okay.
I had a psychology major.
Right. Oh,
Yeah.
well, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that is, in my mind, probably the best education you can get for a financial planner.
Sure. Well, look, I say that because when you do a major, you basically do a really fast fly through of all the things which can just give you an appreciation for all of the huge amount of stuff that you don't know.
8 units? Was it 4?
That rings a bell, but geez, mate, I didn't bring my transcript in here this morning, so.
But still, I mean, so a mate of mine, Ray Geramus, one of the co-founders here at XY, he's doing, or recently completed, one or the other, a psychology degree.
Yes, yeah, right.
And what sort of pushed him around a little, and it's kind of unfortunate, is that isn't on Fazier's
Right.
list of appropriate degrees,
Yeah.
which is kind of crazy, man. It's just kind of crazy because the human part, the interactions, call it psychology, but I mean, obviously it's a skill you can learn without going to uni, but the human side of advice is the piece that won't be roboticized, if that's the right word to use.
Yeah, it's the most future-proof, you might argue.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I remember when AI sort of came out, sort of high level, maybe like 2014 around, and the word robo-advisor sort of popped up and everything. And there was these websites you could go in and put in your, the job that you had and the percentage of the likelihood of it being automated.
Oh, okay, yes. Yeah.
And I remember putting in, financial planner, and it had like 97%. And I was like, you're kidding yourself. There's just no way that because of how emotional money is, more than how rational it is, there's no robot who can walk you through the complexities, emotional and intellectual, that it takes to run a financial life. And the way that I sort of put it is the moment that psychologists, clinical psychologists, can be automated is the day that advice can be automated.
Yeah, that's probably a fair statement. I think Graham Rich and the guys at Portfolio Construction have got, they've termed it phenology being one of their key pillars. Phenology, which I'm going to try and remember the framework off the top of my head, which is
always a risk.
Always a risk. If I don't remember it, of course, I'll cut this out. But
so phenology, is it a term that they invented?
So there has been some academic work done out of the States, and I believe that there's one academic who's coined the term, and has tried to build a bit of a field of research around it. But it's this idea that if you were to imagine an academic field or domain that's focused on the individual, then you have the sort of human experience of that, where you would call that psychology.
Yes.
And if you had the collective, being the sort of community approach to the human experience, you might call it sociology.
Sure.
And if you had a money lens to it, and you had a field or domain of research at a community level or a society level, you'd call that economics. But there's a quadrant there where what is it that's money related that relates to the individual? But we don't actually have a field or domain of study for that. And so this particular academic has coined that phenology. So I really should go and reference everyone properly for this. But
so behavioral economics, would that be similar?
Yeah, I guess so. I think the issue that I see, and this is probably just due to my limited reading, but all of the stuff that I see on behavioral economics is it's just pointing out all the heuristics that we know and all the biases that we know from psychology and just applying an economic lens to them.
Yes.
I'm not sure that really goes deep enough into the financial advice world, for instance, where we're really looking at decision making, and we're really looking at the future and planning of an individual's life or a family's life, and sometimes intergenerationally, of course. So I'm not sure that pointing out that loss aversion, noting that we feel loss as being something which is more painful than the equivalent gain. You're like, okay, we know there's not an asymmetric relationship there. Okay, and that's good to know.
It is good to know.
Of course, Nobel Prizes have been given for this discovery, so it's not like it's a small thing. But I'm not sure that that's sufficient enough for advisors. I don't think we can pick up a list of those types of biases and then feel equipped to be able to help guide people through major financial decisions in their life.
Well played. So I'm definitely going to look into this after this conversation. So phenology,
phenology, yes.
Yeah, man. Okay, cool.
I quite like I really like the idea, and there isn't any coursework which was the first thing that I looked at when I heard the term. Great, where's some coursework on this? No, it's very early stage, and I think that they're really trying to form a field of research around personal financial decision making.
Awesome.
So yeah,
that's cool. And so you're there at uni.
Mm-hmm.
You're spending time in the books with Dr. Friedman, the economist, and Dr. What's the famous psychologist? Let's just go with Freud.
You're after the other Freud.
Yeah. So okay, Friedman and Freud. There you go.
Yeah.
It's like Sigmund and Freud, but less tigers. So there you are at uni, living the dream, as everyone tends to do at uni. Do you go straight into advice from there?
Yeah, I do.
At the same company that you're still at?
No.
Okay, where'd you go?
No, so I went to a company that's no longer in existence, and
always a good sign
for a whole lot of good reasons that I prefer not to say in the public domain. So look, that was a really interesting experience to be perfectly frank.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
And if I was very fortunate at the time to know someone who ran his own business in Sydney. Who I could just bounce off. And I said, look, there are some things which are being advised in this company which I just don't feel comfortable with. I'm not sure that they're in the best interest of clients. And because it was the first role out of university, you're always a little bit green coming out. It's hard to know. And I think I'm very fortunate that I had a sounding board at the time to be able to bounce off and for him to say, look, no, this is not what financial advice is about. You can do it hand on heart, knowing that what you recommend is going to be the best thing for that person. You really should try and file this to the regulator and move on. So
that's excellent. It's when you are green and when you don't exactly know what's how things are done. I mean, when you get to our age, you've sort of been kicked up the butt enough times and heard enough conversations to say, oh, okay, I understand what's possible.
Yeah.
And I also understand that all advisors are kind of different. Like you're never going to get the same experience in two offices at any given time. But there's still a way to look at something logically and sort of morally at a situation, even if you're green, and still have probably a pretty good idea. Like there's a place that's not on my LinkedIn, it's not on my CV, and it'll never be spoken about, but I spent 1 month in my power planning days at this particular office.
Right, okay.
And again, I didn't really know too much, but what they were doing is people would come in, and I'd say these were pretty unsophisticated clients that had been acquired via cold calling.
Yep.
So that was the scenario. These people would walk into this advisor's office. The recommendations were the same for everyone, and it was thus. Take a loan out on your house. Ching, commission 1. Leverage that up. So double it.
Clayton, this is all sounding very familiar.
Ching, commission 2. Yeah. Invest in this leveraged investment. Ching, commission 3. Then, as the power planner, I would then have to do the projections, and all of them were down, as in, like, due to the fees that are being paid, even with all of this,
all the leverage, you still can't get up.
Yeah. You're going to end up in a worse position.
Wow.
Yeah. And I said to them, like I said to the advisor, I was like, look, you're the advisor and I'm the power planner. I get that. But the thing is, this is going down every time. and I'll never forget, he even said, like, don't put a comma in the 4-figure fees at the back. Right, so let's say if it was $9,065, don't put 9,065. Just put 9,065. Like, just it just too much dawned on me. I said, I gotta go.
Yeah,
and I had I didn't have a job lined up or anything, and man, like I was sort of late 20s at that stage. And I'd just gotten back from traveling around the world and I was broke. But I was just like, I can't do this.
No, absolutely not. Well, I mean, it sounds like we had similar experiences early on.
Yeah.
And, you can't articulate it at the time in the way that perhaps we can now. But you're right. You have a feeling that this isn't right and that this isn't the best thing for someone, and you have to...
And thank God,
make a move.
It can't. That's illegal now, right? So due to FOFA,
thank goodness.
God. So FOFA came and everything, and then fascias all the rage. But in a lot of practices, there's not a lot changing. By that I mean, as I go through these conversations with people, and as I've seen on the new XY platform, the tech. Then the world of advisors is sort of split between people that are having a really hard time of it and people that are sort of just continuing on with where the future of their business was headed anyway. Mm-hmm. So out of those two, have you found that the recent changes have had a big impact on you at all?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing that I guess I will need to do some extra stuff for Fascia, having done a business degree and CFP and SMSF. My next ideal field of study would have been a Master's of Applied Positive Psychology. I can't do that now. I'll have to do some other stuff first. So I think it just changes your priorities and when you need to do different things.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that it's fundamentally changed the direction of our business at all. I think that it's enshrined a lot of the things which we've already tried to do. And I think it also focuses on... I think we were already focused on those things, like you said earlier, aren't likely to be done by a robot anytime soon. Like the rest of us, we all want to do things more efficiently. We want to do things better. But I don't see that the future is dim or dark by any stretch. I think it looks fantastic.
Yeah, man. I mean, automate as much as the back office as possible, and then spend as much time as possible with the front, with the client. So, walk us through what would an average client or maybe I guess I'm mostly interested in the average client interactions. So you're dealing with typically not just an individual, not just a couple, usually a intergenerational family. How does that work? What are the nuances? And if there's advisors out there that are interested in somehow getting into this field, what are some tips for them to take away so that they're probably better prepared to be able to do so?
Yeah, okay, sure. So a couple of things to point out is that we do have a range of wealth positions, clients with different wealth positions in our business, right? So it seems odd, I don't know why this is the case, but when anyone comes in to visit us, they're always concerned that they don't have enough money to deal with us. I don't know why that is, but it just seems...
It's probably the little sign on your door that says, anything under a bill, go next door. That's probably why.
Did you put that sign there, Clayton?
Maybe.
None of us put it there.
And I've set up next door.
Well done.
Thank you, marketing.
Well
yeah, what I want.
That's good. So having said all that, I'm extremely conscious that the average client that I look after is very wealthy by any measure, either by standards within the advice community, or even just objectively amongst the Australian community, right?
Yep.
So I think where some of our work starts to become a little bit more unique is where we identify that people are at a wealth position where that next generation is likely to see or could conceivably perpetuate that wealth.
Great.
So what I mean by that is when mum and dad fall off the proverbial perch, that the amount of assets that are sitting around in their family could very well mean that the kids wouldn't need to work if they were to adopt a reasonably average lifestyle or even above average lifestyle.
Yep.
Living in Sydney, Australia. So I think that once you get to that point, and sometimes earlier, it does throw up a fundamentally different set of questions. I think most advisors are very ingrained and indoctrinated into this idea of what is your, also partly by legislation, I guess. What are your goals and objectives? How much do you need to retire? How much are you going to spend? Yes, I'd like a boat by age 60. I'd like to, travel this many times per year, and that's, okay, great. If we can get an investment outcome that reaches that, then job done, and it's, all over, and you sort of fall back into eternal happiness at that point, or something. I'm not exactly quite sure what, and I think advisors probably should spend a little bit more time thinking about what happens when you get to that point.
Yeah.
But it's worthwhile noting that a lot of those things start to become redundant if you're at a point in your life where you've sold a business, you've received an inheritance, you've got yourself into a wealth position that means, within reason, you can have most of those material things that you want.
Yeah. So, what do you do when a client says, I want a Lamborghini?
Thank goodness most of our clients, you would be very surprised to know that they are as wealthy as they are. So I think that the car someone drives has got to be one of the worst predictors of what their actual net wealth is.
That makes me feel very good, considering I don't have a car. Okay, so how do you deal with? And this is a question that I've always kind of thought about, and I'm more inclined to. The way that I expect to accumulate assets over my lifetime is through enterprise rather than sort of, I guess, the virtues of saving and investing, the things that financial advice is the bread and butter. But I expect to be much more probably, hopefully, to the point that I'm your client one day, right? So,
sure.
So that's kind of what I'm going. And one of the things that, although I'm many, many years away from this, but this is kind of something I think about. It's so I grew up like a lot of people in the 80s that lived in small towns. No one had money back then, right? So it's not unusual to hear, but I really enjoyed my childhood at the same time. And so what advice can you give to a 17-year-old or an 18 or just a teenager or an early 20s person who has a legitimate chance of getting an absolute windfall, not needing to study, not needing to work, not needing to be a useful member of society? I guess, for lack of a better term, how on earth do you stop people becoming trust fund kids?
Yeah. Look, great question. Tough one to answer.
Yeah.
Mainly because I think it takes so many different forms. But I think what you're really hinting at there is just your comment about, I grew up without a lot of money and I had a fantastic childhood.
Yes.
And I wouldn't want to change that for myself, and I probably want to change that for my future family. So,
correct.
So I think part of what you're describing there is helping people understand what's the appropriate role for money in someone's life. So I think you need to be able to define that really well and help clients define that, because particularly for sort of second, sometimes even third generation wealthy families, and I can think of one in particular that we work with, who we now work with, I think the third generation of their family, is that the second generation have often watched that first generation build that wealth. They probably didn't grow up in it. They probably grew up in, I don't know, the suburb that you were referring to earlier, or the circumstance that you referred to earlier. They've seen their parents work exceptionally hard in their business, and they've created a great deal of wealth that's been passed to them. And that wealth then generally endears a huge amount of responsibility. So they will often, if they've seen it created and the work and effort, a lot of those values have probably been absorbed just purely through observation of that second generation. Right. So I think that the next challenge comes when when they still need to be able, they then need to articulate to the third generation where this money actually came from and what those values are. They've absorbed them. They probably haven't ever had to articulate them themselves because it's just part of their upbringing and part of their DNA, if you like. And they've taken on that responsibility as stewards, often quite naturally. And I'm speaking in general terms, right?
Yes.
So there's obviously exceptions to this. But if I was to observe a pattern, I'd say that it might go something like this. And there's some statistics which back it up. But I think the challenge then comes for the third generation where, you know, like you say, they've had a perfectly good childhood. They want the best for their kids, which probably involves, you know, big leg ups to property, particularly if you live in Sydney, education, and all of those sorts of cultural things which go along with it. So I think the challenge, firstly, like I said, is to define the right role of money in their life. And then I think they need to attempt to articulate what those values are that you need to pass. Because one of the real dangers I see is no story or legacy being passed with wealth. So if it's just a financial legacy, I think that's woefully insufficient if you actually want the full potential of what that could deliver in that next generation's life and thereafter is woefully insufficient. So one of the questions I love to ask clients is, what do you want to leave your kids in non-financial terms?
Great question.
Yeah, because I think that really starts to tease this out. And unfortunately, a lot of advisors don't help this process. A lot of professionals, and sorry, not just advisors, but accountants, legal, the works. We sort of perpetuate this idea that, okay, you need to have estate planning, you need to have legacy planning. Oh, okay, intergenerational wealth. You need to have testamentary trusts. I said, that's such an insufficient answer to that problem. You know, to have a transaction like this was now in an estate and it's now being administered is a transactional tool. We have a legal document that facilitates that. To think that a transactional tool like that can address what's a fundamentally transitional issue, the transitional issue being I have a 22-year-old who's got their whole life ahead of them and needs to make decisions about their career, their future, their family, and be able to take responsibility for the position which their wealth has afforded them, grow into constructive members of society, and, you know, take on the most amount of responsibility that they can to make their world and the world around them a better place. You know, that's just a totally different conversation. But unfortunately, it seems like we really get stuck at testamentary trusts.
Yeah.
Or make sure your will's done, or make sure your binding death benefit nominations are in place for your super. Don't get me wrong, all those things need to be done. They're really important, because if they're not done properly, you can create all sorts of chaos in someone's family that's entirely unnecessary if planning's been done well. But to think that that's going to be sufficient for a 22-year-old, if, heaven forbid, their parents were to depart the world a little bit too early. And I remember having a conversation with a client to sort of try and tease this out a little bit. And this particular client has a reasonably low-key lifestyle, and many would be very surprised to know what his net position would be. But I was trying to gauge, you know, how well he felt his two sons might be equipped to deal with the $40 million each that would go their way if anything was to happen to him and his wife.
Yeah.
You know, and I said, you need to be strategic. You need to be intentional. If the people who have made these sorts of levels of wealth, you know, how do you pack in all the experience, all of the boardroom, all of the negotiations, all of the war stories that they've had with their own investment journey and their own business journey? You know, how do you distill those learnings and pass them on to your kids so that they can, you know, make good decisions in future for themselves when you're not around?
So not only, okay. So I was about to say, you know, I feel like there probably the Holistic Advisor Award was somewhat legitimate, mate. The way that you're talking about it, it's very cool. So, you really are taking these you're probably having the tough conversations almost, and I'd imagine that although that these clients are probably almost unanimously, but not entirely, older than you.
Oh, absolutely. Unanimously.
Yeah, okay.
Correct. Unanimously older than me, by at least a generation.
But you're sort of giving parental advice, and maybe that's the wrong word to use, but you're giving the trusted advisor advice. You're the ones having the tough conversations that no one else is having with these people who are your clients. And does that make your job easier, harder, less enjoyable, more enjoyable? How do you deal with the fact that they're older than you, but you're giving kind of this very sort of mature, responsible conversations with them? Much more than a typical advisor, right?
Yeah, or maybe much more typical than someone of my age that an ordinary conversation would take place.
And not that you're young, but I'd imagine if...
Excuse me.
but you know, like I could imagine...
No, there's at least a generation gap between these conversations, right? So it's a fair enough thing to point out.
Yeah.
There's a couple of comments I'd make. One, does it make my job more enjoyable? Yeah, absolutely, because I think that this is the stuff which really makes an impact, right? Like if you can avoid or help a family avoid some of the chaos that besets families with lots of wealth, which we've all heard stories about,
totally,
and reflected in the statistics, which supposedly suggest around the world something like only a third of wealthy families manage to see that passed down past 3 generations.
Totally, yeah.
And apparently there are cultural sayings for this. I think we have the saying, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves. I believe the Chinese have got a similar saying which says sort of rice paddies to rice paddies.
That's right.
Don't quote me on that. But apparently this is a common pattern across culture. This is a very sort of human thing that seems to beset people who've done really well for themselves. So sort of going back to your question, does it help or hinder being younger? I don't know. I've heard a lot of people very early on say, you have to advise people who are in a similar demographic to you. And I think that's utter rubbish. Utter rubbish. I think that if you're passionate about what you're doing and how you're trying to help someone, that trumps age on the presumption that you've got something constructive to say. I think my observation is that older people have got a better sense if someone's actually operating in their best interest or have their best interest at heart. And as we all know, that level of trust is the most essential thing. So I wouldn't say age is entirely relevant. I think that younger advisors who have got the experience, minimum set of experience, have got a unique perspective, because that second or third generation of client is actually our peer.
Yes.
So we can better relate to the outlook that someone in their early 30s like I might have, right? Yep. So I think that we've got the benefit of understanding the decision making and the wealth position and all of the planning issues that go along with the parents or grandparents' generation, but the fortunate position of being able to relate to that next gen or the gen after. So yeah, I think it's a unique position that we've got, and it hasn't hindered me, I don't think, anyway.
Awesome.
I haven't allowed it to in my own mind. Whether it has in reality, I guess, isn't up to me to decide.
No, it's a really good answer, because I find a lot of stuff, in fact, if not the majority of the struggles that people have as financial planners, can be solved internally in their own mind. And if you get over the problems or the fake sort of hurdles that you create for yourself, then you can start delivering on many different things. Obviously, there's a lot of hard work rubber hits the road.
Absolutely.
After you've made that decision. But oftentimes, the type I do believe that the type of advice and the type of client that you want to attract, you can, as long as you decide that there's nothing that's going to get in the road of that, and then you go do the work.
You have to do the work. You also have to be, I think, for the type of work and conversations that we're having, you have to be very prepared to invest a lot of yourself. You know, if you have the type of relationship with your professional work that's somehow quite distant or cut from your own personal world, I suspect that you're probably going to be quite hindered in your ability to really help people. I think that you have to be very comfortable if you're I don't know what it is. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I feel like if you're going to do your best work for someone, that part of you inevitably ends up in the mix there. And I don't mean you projecting your own views or values or whatever onto the situation, but I think you need to deal with the reality yourself that you're taking on a huge responsibility when you're guiding and shaping these conversations. And you need to have in the back of your head at all times, if you're wrong, this will have really big implications for someone else. So I think as long as you're carrying that burden of responsibility as you sort of march forward as best as you can, you're going to be in the right spot. But I'm not sure if you can do that unless you're prepared to invest a bit of yourself. On a more, I guess, operational question, do you have everyone in the whole family in the same meeting at the same time, or do you take them differently? It's a case-by-case basis. So in a couple of weeks' time, we will have the whole family. We facilitate a family retreat for this particular family. So the whole extended family will be going up to the Hunter Valley, which will go up and facilitate a day to run through the reporting on where everything's up to, on what we've called the Family Future Fund for this particular family group, as to what's going to be funded, when's going to be funded, and that's a very open dialogue. And hats off to this particular family who are able to do that constructively and do that openly with obviously with our guidance and help. But I would say that's one of the more exceptional and better. That's a real case in what can go really, really well when you take a step back and say, what do I want this wealth to do for my family and future generations? That's awesome. Which is the starting point of the parents, which you have to be conscious of how much you're actually putting into this. We've got a role to play, but we can't create that as a starting point. That's an essential starting point that allows us to go and do work. But it's not like we can take the credit. All the credit for that. We have to play our role really well, but we can't take the credit for the start position.
It seems like wow! I could just only imagine how cool that would be. What would you say to an advisor who wants to get into this type of advice?
Yeah.
Well, how did you end up, and how would someone else follow that path?
Yeah, good question. I think you have to work as part of a team. So if you have a view that, okay, well, I'm going to set my new minimum net wealth at $20 million and upwards from there, and I'm going to design a family office service, and this is going to be my main type of client, this is going to be my offering. I think you need to be open-eyed and realistic about how you're going to deliver on that. And it's just not a gig for a 1 or 2 man band, I suspect. So I think if you're the type of advisor who really wants to run their own show and wants to plow ahead with their own firm and their own brand and all of that sort of thing, which doesn't hugely motivate me. I'm very comfortable and sort of prefer to work as part of a team and work collaboratively. I think you need to be wide-eyed that one person actually can't do that. So in the example that I just mentioned for this particular retreat we've got coming up, we have 3 advisors in the office that help deliver on all the things that we need to do for that family. It's not a small task list. It's a big task list.
Yeah.
So I think you need to make sure that operationally you're geared up for that. So that either means very ambitiously trying to tackle that yourself or gearing up your business to deliver on it. or it means working with a firm that has that type of scale and structure.
And let's say someone's in a similar position to yourself, doesn't want to drive their own business, wants to end up in an employment situation like that. Beyond just simply identifying, and I said simply probably incorrectly there, because first of all, it'd be very hard to tell which financial planning companies actually do this. And so beyond just waiting for a company to put an ad up on Seek, how would someone actively try to go about getting a job in a position for a company like this?
Yeah. So a couple of things. I think you need to take a really long-term view if this is the type of work that you want to do. The reason you need to take a long-term view is because the domains of conversation become really, really broad. I remember getting a phone call from a client because the Point Piper property that they were selling had just passed settlement date, and the client settlement hadn't occurred yet. So the buyer, they being the vendor, hadn't received the cash from the buyer by the agreed date. And rather than calling the lawyer, they call us and say, all right, well, what should we do here at this particular point in time? So there's those sorts of curveballs which will come at you inevitably every single day when you have clients with this sort of financial complexity. So you really need to take a long-term view and be realistic about how long is it going to take me to be able to not have all the answers, but at least be familiar enough with the types of problems that come up that you can field those answers from the appropriate experts in a reasonable amount of time.
That's a good answer. So, have a look at trusts, have a look at property, have a look at what happens when you buy, what happens when you sell, what happens when you create, what happens when you dissolve. What are the problems that can go wrong?
Yeah.
And just putting in the work to find out, I guess, all the complexities of the ins and the outs and the ongoings of all these different. Well,
you need to chase this learning yourself, right?
Yeah.
If you hang around and wait for the client scenarios to come up that will teach you this, you'll be waiting a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, some firms will, the types of firms that you're working in, some will accelerate that faster than others, obviously.
Yes.
And that's just about knowing and asking what type of client base they have, what sort of work that they do.
Yeah.
But yeah, you need to go and chase down this learning yourself. So if there's something that you come across that's somehow related to a financial transaction, you really need to go and figure out what are all the circumstances that happen around this.
Yeah.
You need to know what happens around cap raisings for business, and what happens if you're spinning out an entity or a business unit, and you need to know what the tax implications of that are. You need to know what happens when you roll up structures. And so a lot of it's accounting. You need to be able to be fluent in the language of accounting, which I feel like it's a language I'm very much still learning. But
oh my God,
but
yes.
Accounting is a big part, because as soon as you have that sort of financial complexity, you often have the accounting issues that go along with it.
And when you say accounting, because I did an accounting degree, and I worked as a tax accountant, but then I didn't learn anything whatsoever about trusts,
right?
About I learned how to how to bloody go through a shoebox of receipts on one day, and then on the next day, sort of like do a depreciation schedule for a property, and there was a bit of work to do, but nothing like learning about what an ESVCLP fund is and how you get a 50% tax rebate on the year that you make a startup investment, and that you've got a 10-year CGT free.
I think you'll find it's a 20%, man.
Is it?
Yes.
not 50? Okay, 20.
I think it's 20.
No, when I said 50, I was like, that might be a bit generous. But a 10-year CGT free. Yep. And so all that's and mind you, I guess that's only come about in the last couple of years. Yeah. But a lot of this stuff, as you said, you have to just go in and it's all self-taught, and you have to find out why it's important for people, and it's not impossible, I guess.
No, it's absolutely not. and you need to chase it down as a priority, right? So, legal firms put on workshops and seminars, and you need to put yourself through these things. And I think I don't know if this is exactly what I've done hand on heart, but at least I feel like I've tried to do, that if I come across an area or a transaction or an event that I haven't come across before, I want to know all of the things that have happened around this and understand them properly. So you need to be able to read. I think this is one of the bits of advice which I got from, I think it was Peter Hogan who taught the SMSF course, which I did some years ago. And he said, look, if you want to be an SMSF specialist, you need to be able to read and interpret the law. You need to be able to pick up the legislation, because you're in a field where there's a lot of opinions. And at some point, you need to be comfortable if the opinion that you're forming is correct or not, if you're going to advise someone. And you need to be able to pick that up, not just out of an article that you found by Googling something. You need to be able to look up the Act. And I remember in that course, I was very fortunate. It was my first real introduction to looking through the law as it pertained to any field of financial advice, and learning that way, or at least starting to form a view that way, and reading ATO guidelines and IDs and all of that sort of stuff. So I think you need to be able to chase things down to source documents, which means pushing past a bunch of hurdles, and it takes time, which is, I think, going back to my earlier comment, why you need to take a long-term view if this is the type of work that you want to do. Yeah. It just doesn't happen overnight. Yeah. And you might be asking yourself many times, but how many times do I come across this? Well, yeah, that's right. You might not come across it again for 5 years, but when that happens, you'll be able to, at least I hope, be able to move through things at a pace that's going to be helpful for a client. You're not going to have to just reinvent the wheel every single time. So I like to think over the 10 years of advice, when I've come across new things, I've tried to bed them down in my own learning as quickly and as rapidly as I possibly can, and robustly, I guess. Yeah. So that if I come across this again, and maybe this all comes out of my first year of experience, like we were talking about before, because I didn't know much at all, and I really hated that position. I really hated talking to people without just feeling like a deer in a headlight. Yeah. And I really didn't like, and of course that was coupled with a sales culture at the time, and it was just this horrible mix of wanting to being pressured under a sales culture, but not have the goods to back it up. Maybe it's just something I've been running from ever since. Yeah, it's a good point. I remember back in 2014, I had a client that had made and this is 2014, a hell of a lot of money in Bitcoin. And from there, I sat down and I spent so long learning all about it that I ended up becoming the first financial planning company in Australia to be able to accept Bitcoin as payment. Oh, right. Okay, yeah. Now, no one ever paid like in Bitcoin, but I do. But you could. Yeah, exactly. You had a wallet. And the way that it worked was because the licensee. So the way that I had to do was the Bitcoin was converted into cash, which was then deposited into the licensee's bank account, which would have come through to me. So that's how it was originally organized, and that was back in 2014. I remember being like, oh wow, I'm going to get heaps more of these clients. Nah, didn't get any. And then so I went on a pretty big journey to learn about Bitcoin, which I am after sort of spending a fair few years looking at it, I have the view that there is, how in any given year, your portfolio has probably a 51% chance of going up and 49% chance of going down. But over, say, the course of 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, your chances of it going up sort of increase dramatically. Yeah. The way that I explain Bitcoin, if you want to call it investing, is that there's a 50% chance of going up and a 50% chance of going down. And no matter how many years you push that out, I don't think those percentages change. So when people say either that they're bullish or bearish on Bitcoin, I'm actually neither, because it has
it has no. It's sort of similar to gold, but it does less than gold, right? So gold has almost no utility except for jewelry and a little bit in electronics. Bitcoin has essentially no utility at all. It's not a superior way of sending money. Sometimes, if the demand is not huge, it can be quicker, but those things fall apart pretty quickly. What it does do is it simply is scarce. So it's simply scarce. But there are many things that are simply scarce. There are elements on the elemental table that are scarce that I don't need either. So there's many things that are scarce. It doesn't necessarily mean that I need it. Is it gimmicky? Yes, sure. Do enough people believe in it? Yes, sure. Is the internet going away? No. Is money going away? No. Is internet money going away? Probably not. I've got sort of every single argument on both sides of the coin to the point that I think it's almost, and this is just a personal opinion, I think it's almost diligent to actually have sort of a 1 to 2% exposure to cryptocurrency in a portfolio.
Is there a question in this, mate? Because
no.
You're asking me to comment on Bitcoin? Oh, geez,
actually, here's a comment. Do you have a client that has made money from Bitcoin?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, there you go. So I'm sure you had some exposure to it. Did you then go out and learn anything about it?
Yeah, well, it's very, very recently we have a client who works for a big name technology company who is very into the crypto space and has made a lot of money from it. And yeah, I sunk, I don't know how many hours on YouTube understanding cryptography and understanding different types of coins and their utility and distributed ledgers and how nodes work and proof of work and proof of stake and distributed consensus and all of those sorts of things. So I can't really say, woe is me. You know, I had to go and learn all these things because, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit the way I'm wired. It's, while I'm cooking dinner, I quite like to have, some explanatory.
But see, and I guess that sort of fits the narrative you were saying before around it's self-taught and there's a lot to learn. And then you just have to make sure that you understand all aspects really of finance if you're going to become the holistic advisor of the year. And Bitcoin's just probably a recent one, but then it goes back, to trusts and everything else in between and buying and selling property. Goodness, I wouldn't know what to say if a client said to me, the buyer hasn't paid. I'd be like, spewing.
Sucks to be you that your $10 million house just failed to sell properly. I think I should also add, for the record, that it's not like it's all self-taught. You really need to seek out other really good people, other advisors. And look, I've done this recently this year for an advisor over in the States who said, look, you, as far as I can tell, you are doing a lot of the work that I'm learning to do. You're at least 20 years ahead of me. I would, if you can, could you spare a couple of hours, maybe twice a year? I would love just to send you an agenda of things that I'd like to talk about. I don't want to pinch your IP or anything, but I do want a sounding board, and I would like some sort of mentoring and
phenomenal.
You have to seek out these other voices that are really going to help you develop. Some of them will be advice related. A lot of them won't be. But I don't want to leave this with the impression like I've gone and sought all of this out myself. I've found people who are way smarter than me in all sorts of domains and spent lots of time with them trying to learn as much as I can.
That's awesome. Well, one of the big things that I took out of this conversation was if there's a meetup event or if there's a subject you don't know a lot about, and then what's this ESOP thing? How do I learn about employee share plans? I'm just going to go along to this meeting because it's free and it's 2 hours of my time and it's after hours, and I think that's probably a really good. That's a really good way to go about it.
And you've highlighted something really important there. Is if you think that you can do all this within hours. In normal working hours, you're
Kidding yourself.
You're absolutely kidding yourself.
Yes.
So I can only think of how many breakfasts and after work sort of dinner events and workshops and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Would have gone to over the years. You have to. Yeah, you have to take that view. If you think you can squeeze it in your day job, you're kidding yourself.
Mate, because we've hung out a handful of times, and these are all a bunch of questions that I've really wanted to ask you. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your information, and hopefully there's a bunch of advisors out there that'll sort of, get a step in the right direction if they ever choose to give this type of advice.
Yeah.
Now, if anyone wants to sort of shout out, say, actually, I want to catch up twice a year with a bunch of questions. Obviously, you're on LinkedIn. Actually, have you downloaded the new social media platform, the X1?
No, he's putting me on the spot.
Yeah, come on, mate.
That's all right. I'm behind the 8 ball. I just got back from holidays. Cut me some slack.
We launched about a month ago, and we're already above 800. I think we're getting close to 900 within the first month. So
fantastic.
That's done exceptionally well. So I'll make sure you're in there.
Obviously, I'll jump on that, Clayton.
Good man. All right, mate. Cheers. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much.